Well, welcome to the Seattle Public Library, and I am thrilled that so many of you are with us. And I'd like to start tonight's evening by thanking so many of the people that made tonight possible. First is the Seattle Public Library Foundation, then our dear friends, Eulalie and Carlos Ganduzzi, the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, Starbucks, who has been our partner in many of our programs and all of our library openings, the Elliott Bay Book Company, and this year's judges. I really want to take time for all of us to thank the Seattle Public Library Foundation. This year, the foundation is celebrating its 25th anniversary. Since it was incorporated, the foundation has raised, with many people's help, over $100 million to help the Seattle Public Library. This funding has helped us buy more books and materials. It's allowed us to prevent free public programs. And of course, it also has helped with the renovation and expansion of all of our libraries. And if you haven't been to, other than this, one of our new libraries, I really recommend treating yourself. We just opened the Douglas Truth Library last Saturday, and it is magnificent. But the month before that, the new library in South Park, and on. And I really suggest you treat yourself by looking at them and sharing them with the people who live there. The foundation represents thousands of people, families who make contributions of all sizes. And I know many of you are here tonight that have been donors, and I want to thank you, and I think we should all thank you for your support. I also want to thank the mayor and the city council for their support of the city through increasing our library's budget. There was also a person in the audience who writes about that sometimes who I think has helped too. But I think that it's nice that our budget is just about up to where it was before the bad times came to the library in the city. And I also want to thank the Friends of the Library who will continue their advocacy to support our library's growth through their efforts with the City Council and the Mayor. So thank you, Friends of the Library. One of the great things that's happened when the Seattle Public Library Foundation and the Seattle Public Library took over the sponsorship of the Washington State Book Awards is that they come with a $1,000 honorarium for the winners. And so in the 40 years of history, this is only the 7th time. And I know that many of the winners from before think, I wish I were winning now. For the Scanduzzi Children's Book Award, we really thank Eulalie and Carlos Ganduzzi. And for the Maxine Cushing Gray Fellowship for the Distinguished Northwest Writer, and you'll hear more about this later, we really want to thank Ms. Gray's friends who created the award in her honor. So for a little bit of background, since 1967, Washington celebrated the state literary community by presenting what were then called the Governor's Writers Awards, and which are now called the Washington State Book Awards. And they're presented to authors of outstanding books published in the previous year. For all those early years, the Washington State Library and Humanities Washington managed that. And then, as I said, the Washington Center for the Book at the Seattle Public Library took over the awards and assumed the responsibility, and with the help of the Seattle Public Library Foundation. But a lot of the work, besides that Chris does, is the work of the judges, who had a lot to do. And so many of you are here tonight, and I want to introduce you. Karen Maeda-Allman, if you could just stand, and we'll thank all of you. Michael Coy, Todd Marshall, Venta Sillins, and Edwin Valle. Thank you. And there was a separate panel of children's specialists that named the winners of the Scanduzzi Children's Book Award. And they are, and if they could stand, Mary Harris, Diana LaBate, and Judy Nelson. Thank you. And I believe tonight there are past recipients of the Washington State Book Award, or the Governor's Award. And if you're here and a past winner, would you stand so we can recognize what you brought us? Thank you. The format for tonight is we'll hear briefly from each award recipient, and then following the readings, everyone is invited to meet the authors at a reception and book signing, although we think that we should let the authors get out first so they can get something to eat and drink while they're signing their books. It'll make them much happier, I bet. And that will happen out here. And we want to thank, as always, our friends at the Elliott Bay Book Company, wherever you are, for everything you've done to support our library programs. This year, the two juries considered more than 200 books published by Washington authors in 2005. So I really want to make sure that we honor all the nominees, and congratulations to the finalists and winners who are listed in the program. So now we'll celebrate the 6 winners who we're here to really hear from. The first award is for fiction. The Washington State Book Award finalists in fiction are a rich and varied group who worked on both, and what I'm reading is the words of the judges, so I'm trying to make sure I'm supporting their words very carefully, working on both grand and intimate scales. They include Mackenzie Bezos, The Testing of Luther Albright, Matt Briggs, Shoot the Buffalo, Stacy Levine, Francis Johnson, Nancy Rawls, My Jim, and Jess Walter, Citizen Vince. The winner of the Washington State Book Award in Fiction is A Sudden Country by Karen Fisher. So Karen, if you want to come up, I'll read what the judges said. In telling the story of the Oregon migration of 1847, Ms. Fisher has found a voice worthy of the immensity of the undertaking, one as grand as the voyage and as intimate as the exchanges between lovers. I couldn't have written this. The story of the trapper James McLaren and the reluctant traveler Lucy Mitchell ultimately tells of America at a crossroads. The poetry, sophistication, and keen intelligence of Karen Fisher's writing make for an impressive debut. A Sudden Country won the Mountains and Plains Booksellers Association Best Fiction Award and was a finalist for the PEN/Faulkner Award and a Los Angeles Times First Fiction Award, among other honors. Karen Fisher has been a teacher, wrangler, farmer, and carpenter. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks. Thank you so much. I never know how anyone can choose a best work of fiction, especially from among so many really fine books. I appreciate so much the chance to come up here. Thank you to Deborah and Chris and the judges and everyone who made this night possible. I don't think any book I ever write will be quite like the first book. I conceived this one in about 1990. I had been teaching American history at the time and had such a strong identity as someone whose ancestors had been in the American West for a long time that I felt really compelled by the story of the West. And the Oregon Trail was such a foundational myth. It was really second only to the story of the Puritans, I think, in my mind, in terms of how simplified and romanticized and ingrained they were in my consciousness, and in terms of how betrayed I later felt when I learned a much less savory version of that story as an adult. I began fairly lightly, I guess, with the idea that I would take the most romantic version of the West, which I thought was the bodice ripper. The ones that, and I don't know if anybody even publishes them anymore, but the most romantic bodice ripper was, the young, westward bound woman, immigrant, and the trapper she falls in love with. And I'd sort of grown up with that story, that myth, and I kind of wanted to run it headlong into the much more contemporary, raw, dark, misanthropic, anti-Euro-American revisionism version of the West that I'd first come across in Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. I wanted them to have a train wreck in my book. I wanted to find out what would happen if you took those two polar opposites. And what was the middle ground of truth? It was a fairly light question when I asked it, but it was a long, long journey. The journey to completion took about 12 years. And during that time, that little Oregon Trail computer program came out. And all over the country, kids in school were like choosing things to bring along and how many oxen they would take. And they would either live or die on the journey depending on what they chose, right? Depending on what happened. And I figure I wrote about 5 different drafts. So I made that crossing 5 different times, and I died every time. I died of ignorance the first time. The second draft, I think, died of starvation. We were working really hard. The third draft, I'm sure, died of arrogance. The fourth draft, I'm sure, died of isolation. Each time I set out, I thought it would be the last time. I thought I would get through. I thought I would write a novel that ultimately would find an audience. And every time I got almost to the end, I found myself in the position that Lucy Mitchell is in this book, where she's out of resources, she's out of ideas, she's afraid to go on, the Indians are harassing them, and she sort of turns to them and thinks, don't you know we can't go back? And that was very much how I felt. It was too frightening to go on, but it was much worse to go back. The last draft did get through. I did get published. I found a publisher right around Christmas time, and I realized it had been about 12 years from the beginning to the end of the journey. And it was around Christmas time, and I realized that I could sing the 12 Days of Christmas with my novel, because 12 years, right? I had 11 really dedicated readers. I had to write the acknowledgments. I didn't write it as a Christmas carol. 10 crappy printers, 9 occupations, 8 writing desks, 7 new computers, 6 different houses, 5 complete drafts, 4 writers' conferences, 3 children, 2 patient dogs, and 1 incredibly, incredibly faithful, loyal, dedicated, loving husband whom I've lost. Where is he? There he is, that guy, right there. I got through it. To finish off, the last thing I really have to say about a journey like this, I wrote right about towards the end of the book. Lucy Mitchell, who's made the journey, is talking to a new neighbor, a young man about 17 years old, who is a suitor to one of her daughters. They talked of cattle in buildings. She found herself growing so much more attentive to people's stories. There was something about the people here that made them easy to know and like, as though, for all their individual differences, they shared the same rueful secret. It was not so bad despite the rain. Very grand, truly, when the sun came out and she could squint across the morning to see the great white mountains standing alone so near, with the river going by and the forests on the hills and the litter of industry all around, fallen trees bleaching on slopes where the sun had never shone, vines coming back in tangles. It was a fine country, or would be, different from any she had known. But if it was the promised land, it was not because of trees or climate, but because, just getting here, they had found something new inside themselves. Thank you.
Tonight's second award is for poetry. Stylistically various, the Washington State Book Award finalists in poetry all achieve high levels of emotional power and formal control. They include Lilius Beaver, Bellini in Istanbul, Linda Baird's First Hand, J.W. Marshall, Taken With, Katrina Roberts, The Quick, David Wagner, Good Morning and Good Night. The winner of the Washington State Book Award in Poetry is Luck is Luck by Lucia Perillo. Blessed with an associative mind that ranges over vast yet unified terrain, Lucia Perillo exhibits an imaginative and exhilarating zest. Whether writing about the body's decay or having a big nose, Ms. Perillo's poetic voice is unique and powerful, occasionally funny, often poignant, and always memorable. Luck is Luck offers surprise and delight. Lucia Perillo is the author of 4 books of poetry, Dangerous Life, The Body Mutinies, and The Oldest Map with the Name America. Her writing has won many distinctions, including a MacArthur Fellowship and the Kate Tufts Award. She just won the Kinsley Tufts Award for Luck is Luck, making her the first person to be doubly recognized by Claremont University and the Tufts Endowment.
Okay, I have no prepared announcements to make, but so I'll just roll with whatever comes to mind. I do have the esteemed Madeline DeFries's watch, which she gave me in the bathroom, so I will not overstay my time. But I would, of course, like to thank the Seattle Public Library, especially Chris Agashi, for holding open the deadline on the prize when she learned that my book hadn't been considered. And who else do I have to thank? I can't think of them right now, but I would like to say that writers are like bats in that they send out their sonar beams out into the darkness, and usually what they get back is absolute nothing. Just more darkness, especially if you're a poet. But every once in a while, this little pingy thing comes back, and I think, we all know, well, writers are supposed to say that awards are meaningless, it doesn't matter, they're just serendipitous, they have no reflection on the true value of the work. But it is very nice to get one of those little sonar pings coming back. So I'll read a poem about crows. You all know that there's been a history of crow poems from many great poems, like poets like Seamus Heaney, Ted Hughes, etc. So this poem is called The Crows Start Demanding Royalties. Of all the birds, they are the ones who mind their being armless most. Witness how, when they walk, their heads jerk back and forth like rifle bolts. How they heave their shoulders into each stride, as if they hope that by some chance, new bones would come popping out with a little boxing glove on the end of each. Little Elvises, the hairdo slicked with too much grease, they convene on my lawn to strategize for their class action suit. Flight they would trade in a New York minute for a fist on the shift and a black muscle car at any stale green light. But here in my yard, by the Jack-in-the-Box dumpster, they can only fossick in the grass for remnants of the world's stale buns. And this, despite all the crow poems that have been written, because men like to see themselves as crows, the head jerk performed in the rearview mirror, the dark brow commanding the rainy weather. So I think I know how they must feel, ripped off, shook down, taken to the cleaners. What they'd like to do now is smash a phone against a wall, but they can't, so each one flies to a bare branch and screams. So thank you.
Well, I think that there is a story here. The next award is for history and biography, and what I am told is that the finalists for the award in history and biography caused animated debate for the jury. So maybe after a few glasses of wine, we can find out what it's about. They include Jack Heyman, On American Soil, How Justice Became a Casualty of World War II, David Neiwert, Strawberry Days, How Internment Destroyed a Japanese-American Community, and Eric Sigliano, Michelangelo's Mountain, The Quest for Perfection in the Marble Quarries of Carrara. The winner of the Washington State Book Award in History Biography is The Worst Hard Time, The Untold Story of Those Who Survived the Great American Dust Bowl by Timothy Egan. Although accounts of those who left are often told, we have few stories of the people who stayed with their land to survive what many have called the worst environmental disaster of the 20th century. Tim Egan interviewed survivors, used firsthand accounts and detailed research as the foundation for his outstanding historical work. His excellent writing recreates the sorrow, distrust, bitter acceptance, and hope that mark a story driven by the author's passion to tell it. Timothy Egan is a national enterprise reporter for the New York Times. In 2001, he was part of a team of reporters awarded the Pulitzer Prize for a series on race in the United States. His other books include Breaking Blue, The Good Rain, and The Winemaker's Daughter. And oh my God, The Worst Hard Time is a finalist for the National Book Award, which is pretty cool. When John Marshall told me this last week, if it was last week, I couldn't believe how excited you were going to be here, not just tonight to get this award, because the judges knew ahead of time, and so thank goodness they did make this choice. But you're going to be back here tomorrow night discussing the research and writing of your novel, The Winemaker's Daughter. So welcome tonight and tomorrow night, Tim Egan.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank everyone for coming tonight. In case people don't know, last night the Rolling Stones were in town, and I think of Deborah Jacobs as the Mick Jagger of librarians. And I've never even seen her dance either, but I just think of her that way, and she's got the Jagger-esque quality. I would like to thank the jurors and the foundation. This is a wonderful award. National Book thing, I was telling Deborah I had a dream/nightmare the other night that they said they have to redo them. They made a huge mistake. And the dream was like, oh yeah, of course, naturally they made a mistake. Lucia said something that caught my ear, that she compared writers to bats. I got an email from a friend of mine the other day who's a doctor, and he said, congratulations, writers are actually like doctors. My book, as you know, is about the arguably the worst period in United States history. And he said, writers and doctors both benefit off of other people's misery. I said, thanks, thank you very much. About 10 years ago, I interviewed Daniel Sullivan, who was the artistic director of the Seattle Repertory Theater now. He's left us for Manhattan. And I asked him why there was so much theater in Seattle. Seattle's had this distinction of having more equity productions, actors' equity productions per capita than any city in the United States. So I said, why is there so much theater here? And he had this fascinating answer. He said, in a dark, cold, wet place, people like to go into caves and tell stories. Which doesn't explain the summer, but it does explain why I basically don't do any events in the summer. And I think that applies to why this is a fantastic literary community. We are so lucky to be lovers of the written word and live in this city and this time in our history. Not long ago, I met a Latino poet from El Paso. I met him at a writers' conference, and I told him where I was from, and he just about kissed my feet. And I said, "What's that all about?" And he said, "I was going around the country trying to get anyone to come listen to my poems." And he said, "I'd show up, and there would be 2, 3 people. Some nights, nobody would be there." And there's authors that know what that's like. It's pretty bad. And he said, "I got to Seattle, and there were like 75 people there. 75 people to hear me read my poems. I'm a Latino poet from El Paso." And I said, "Well, that was just a typical night. It was probably a midweek, wasn't it?" So we were so lucky. I've had a lot of times in my life where people have asked me to go somewhere else. I mean, opportunities to move out of Seattle. I was born in this city. I was raised in Spokane. But I consider myself so lucky. The older I get and the more I work as a writer, to live in a city that just truly values the written word. Now, as far as this going into caves and telling stories, with this Dust Bowl book, I wasn't sure if I had a story. I went down to what I think is, and I hope I'm not offending anyone from the Great Plains, the place that has the worst weather in the world. 6 of the 7 or so things that the sky can throw at you can kill you. And the wind is always blowing. And it's very sad right now because all these little towns in the Southern Plains that were formed almost overnight, they're all dying right now. They're all disappearing. The schools have closed. There's no more laughter of little children. There's old people holding on, living on their social security, and just, sort of whiling their days away as the towns get ready to fold. Some of them are leaving the map. They're just falling away without any sort of, announcement. And I knew the first few days I was down there researching, I was talking to some woman. Every town has some keeper of the secrets, someone who has the town's attic. And this woman did what so many other people did. She went back and she said she got this shoebox out. And she brought the shoebox back, and she opened up the shoebox. And there were these pictures, and there were these letters, and there was these stories of this time of this story that is just about ready to leave us. That these people are in their 80s and their 90s, and they lived through this unbelievable period, and no one told their story. They told the story of the Grapes of Wrath. They told the story of people the Okie diaspora, as it was called, but no one told the story of the people who stayed behind, which was most of the people, by the way. 2/3 of the people in the Dust Bowl never left. And so I listened to the story about a time when people ate canned tumbleweed, a time when parents gave up their children. They just couldn't raise them. They thought they were going to die. A time without Social Security. A time when the sky would go black at midday and they say you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. A time when they thought the world was going to end. A time when 1 in 4 people were out of work. The worst hard time. And I came back from that trip and I thought about that stories in that shoebox and those letters and those pictures, and I thought of what Sullivan had said, just go into a cave and tell a story. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and of course we'll all be thinking of you in New York. The next award is for general nonfiction, and the finalists in general nonfiction are Hugo Kujia, 58 Degrees North, The Mysterious Sinking of the Arctic Rose, James McKean, Homestand, Growing Up in Sports, David E. Miller, Toward a New Regionalism, Environmental Architecture in the Pacific Northwest, and Jonathan Rabin, My Holy War, Dispatches from the Home Front. The winner of the Washington State Book Award in General Nonfiction is In the Company of Crows and Ravens by John M. Marsluff and Tony Angel. John and Tony combine outstanding research and writing with impressive illustrations to capture the ubiquitous corvid in its beauty and cunning. After years of observation, and with the help of colleagues from around the world, they describe the birds from poetic, scientific, historical, and social perspectives. They relate the influences and interactions between bird and human, while neither anthropomorphizing nor sentimentalizing. From their tales of, as the most sentimental person, I can't believe I couldn't say that. From their tales of walnut-cracking Japanese carrion crows to McDonald's-friendly American crows, this book spotlights our human fascination with the crow. John Marsloff is the Denman Professor of Sustainable Resource Sciences and Professor of Wildlife Science in the College of Forest Resources at the University of Washington. He also directs the Urban Ecology Program. He's authored more than 100 scientific papers on a variety of ecological issues, including bird behavior and wildlife management. Tony Angel has written and illustrated widely, and he won the prestigious Master Artist Award of the Leh Yai Art Museum. Mr. Angel is also a respected sculptor whose work can be found in public and private collections around the country. He is active in Washington's chapter of the Nature Conservancy and was director of the environmental education for the state for 30 years.
Well, John and I have agreed that it might be nice to greet you a little bit differently before we move to our thank yous. And we're going to call on our friends to help you make a distinction, because this is something that we've discovered over the years. Most of our lives, I think, have been captivated by birds. Or all of which means in crow and raven lore, here we are, and we're glad to be here and glad to be alive in spite of the traffic tonight, and would like to share very quickly part of our ongoing story, but first of all, provide, I think, a profound thank you for this recognition by the esteemed judges, and particularly by the Seattle Library, and a thank you for certainly our families involved, and John would say likewise.
It's hard to get a word in edgewise with this guy, but he's a pleasure to work with. Thank you very much, Tony, for helping make this program a success and this project a success. And to our family and colleagues and students I've had over the years have been fabulous in really providing insights that we talk about in this book. I'd like to thank Bill Gates for having the computer reset right when we came up here in the hopes that it might start again, but I'm not sure if it will. But Tony and I got started on this project, as you've heard from all the authors tonight. These are long, involved efforts, and we've been working for 8 or 9 years on this idea of how to tell people about the American crow before we finally gave birth to this book. And we settled upon collecting a variety of anecdotes about how crows behave and influence our lives, and tried to put that into perspective really of how humans influence crows and how crows in turn influence us. We've heard some insights on that from poetry tonight already, so we've got more material for the next edition.
Absolutely. That's, with the next revision, going to be front line, the poetry section. Beautiful poem. We discovered, after we went out to answer 1,001 questions about crows and ravens that we'd gotten over our lives, that we came upon a much different book, because the corvid clan in general, and ravens and crows in particular, are esteemed throughout the northern hemispheric cultures and have been for thousands and thousands of years. One of the things that we had anticipated coming up on the screen sometime tonight was a timeline that would actually show you, which is included in the book, which I'm sure you're going to get your hands on, that would take us back to some of the very earliest of hominids, where certainly the very opportunistic, clever, and insightful ravens and crows saw this kind of stumbling, quick but not too keen on the ground primate that they could fool most of the time. And probably a lot of us would agree are still doing a good job of it today. The timeline will show, in effect, starting down here, a suggestion of how those early interactions began, and would take us all the way up to the present, where not only are we changing our social structure in response to corvids to guard against their scavenging and predations, but we're also now incorporating them into our observations of the world at large, whether it be poetry or music, or taking them as mascots for professional football teams. But again, all the way through, there's this recurring, actually, the earliest is in the caves of Lascaux, where you have homage to the hunt in Lascaux with a very corvid-like form, totemic, if you will, and that occurs again and again in some of those early cave etchings, indicating that they were quick to pay homage in their own particular way.
The way we've tried to bring again all these different ideas that people tell us about crows, and we get lots of different stories about how people interact with crows, how we try to bring them together is with this idea of cultural coevolution. And it's pretty simple. The idea is that our culture, the things we pass on socially by learning to one another, as we're doing tonight, those sorts of things are influenced by our interactions with nature generally and crows specifically. And the evolution of culture in crows, which are social animals, they perhaps don't give awards like this, at least that we know of, but they do pass on traditions socially. Those sorts of things are influenced by their interactions with us, and vice versa in a positive feedback sort of way.
A lot of this interaction, of course, has been measured by a negative response to corvids, but as we hunt them, and as these slides suggest, we have something of a surprising kind of encounter. The corvids, we discover, are making observations about us and accommodate and change their behavior to continue to stay, if you will, one step ahead. The corvids that were not slaughtered and laid out in even rows here were probably back in the trees watching these hunters and avoiding this area and learning from the interaction, the negative interaction with their brethren. That's why they've been such survivors, and that's why we see their populations increase all around. They're always exploiting us.
Other crows shown down here in response to a woman from Bellevue have formed positive associations with people and learned to appreciate them for handouts. And this has prompted some of the research we've been doing recently at the University of Washington. We started to try to understand how crows recognize individual people. And the best way to do that, we felt, was to put a mask on and see if they'd remember us if we caught them with one mask, for example, the caveman mask, and if we tried to be nice to them with another mask, for example, the Dick Cheney mask. I'm not going to bore you too much with the details, but believe me, they know the difference between Dick Cheney and the caveman on campus.
Intelligence, and we're moving along pretty quickly here to give you a general theme of what we've done. Intelligence is a profound, again, measure of corvids. And yet they don't have the largest skull relative to body size in the birds, but they seem to do the most with it. We've heard that before. Anyway, this is a measure along the line, and you can see that they're right up there with some of the early hominid measures in skull size and body size, and continue to maintain their role as great learners and insightful birds.
So we want to show you one film, just a quick video that to us really captures some of the reason why people are so excited about these animals. They've influenced us for a long time, as you've heard, but it's because of the amazing learning skills that they possess. This is an example of a New Caledonian crow, which is not the same species we have here, of course, but similar. And it's an expert tool user. This was done in the laboratory at Oxford, and what it will show, if I can ever find the pointer again here, is that these animals, when presented with a challenging task here to get food out of a plastic tube, they will fashion a tool that enables them to complete this task. I think you'll be impressed with their abilities to do this, if I can get it to go.
And we're always prepared to act that one out in case it gets stuck.
Give me a second on this one. There we go. So this is Betty the crow giving the task of trying to get food out of this plastic tube. She's got a straight piece of wire.
And it just doesn't bend it any old way. It uses the leverage underneath that stone to make a hook. I don't know how many of you have tried to bend a coat hanger from the short end to get something out of a drain. I have. That crow is way ahead.
Thank you very much for your attention and patience with the technology.
We'll now be honoring the Scanduzzi Children's Book Award. We are delighted and grateful to Lele and Carlos Scanduzzi for so much generosity of them and their families to our library. But we're also thrilled that they've created an award to pay special tribute to children's literature by creating this annual award. It recognizes both one picture book for children, with the awards going to both the author and the illustrator, and one book targeted to 10 to 18-year-olds. The winner of the latter award is The Witch's Boy by Michael Gruber. Once upon a time, a powerful witch stumbles on a very ugly baby and brings him home to be raised by a bear and a djinn. So begins Michael Gruber's engrossing fantasy, where familiar fairy tales are reshaped into the real story. As Lump, the witch's boy, grows up, he discovers an unforgiving human world that seems cruel and deceitful. Behind the mask he wears to hide his ugliness, he plots and schemes, ignoring his mother's warnings about the disturbing pattern. The actions lead to disaster, but also to self-discovery and even happily ever after. Michael Gruber's debut teen novel received starred reviews in both Booklist and School Library Journal. It was named a 2006 Best Books for Young Adults Award by the Young Adult Library Services Association, a division of the American Library Association. Readers will find this an engrossing and thoroughly satisfying tale. Mr. Gruber could not be with us tonight, but his wife, Elizabeth Winder, will accept the award on his behalf.
Forgive me for not being Michael. I asked him to email me his response. So I'm going to read that to you first, and then I'm going to read a section of the book that I really love a lot. I get to do that. So here's what he emailed me. First, I'd like to thank you all for giving this award to Witch's Boy. And I want to say how sorry I am that unchangeable travel plans prevented me from accepting this award in person. I never got an award before, which isn't true, and I'm glad of that. Of all the things I've written, this is the one that got it. It's my most personal book, and the one I'm fondest of, and the one that took the longest to get published, 10 years. We wept a lot about it. I started writing it in an isolated mountain cabin in 1988, it's in Virginia. Wrote one chapter and put it away for 10 years. When I took it out again, it sort of wrote itself, and I finished it in about 2 months. Then nobody would buy it. Agents would write to me and say, gee, this is good writing, but I don't know how I can sell it. It's sort of a kid's book and sort of not a kid's book, and we know adults don't read kids' books. This was before Harry Potter. Right. After Harry Potter, I sent it to my agent, and he sold it in about 20 minutes, which goes to show you that books like fruit have their season, and I'm very happy that The Witch's Boy has finally dropped, so to speak, off the tree. I'm especially happy to have the book chosen for an award by librarians. Everyone in the book business knows that the only children's books that succeed are the ones recommended by librarians. And so I'm doubly glad to receive an award from the librarians of our state. Again, thank you very much. Well, the part that I chose to read is, I don't know how many of you have actually read the book, but it's the part where his witch mother takes him into the forest to look for magical herbs, and she discovers an entry underneath a hawthorn tree, which is a mysterious place. So I'm going to read that part. I just love it. Suddenly, the woman halted, sniffing the air, her head tilted as if listening to some secret sound. "This is well met," she said. "It is time you learned something about this. Follow me closely and be silent." The woman ducked under a low-hanging hawthorn and crawled down what appeared to be a well-beaten tunnel in the underbrush. The boy followed her, puzzled, but with a growing anticipation. Neither of them made more sound than a squirrel. The tunnel opened into a substantial hollow, damp and roofed with thorn, backed by black boulders. There was room to spare for both Lump and the woman to sit. Greenish light filtered down and cast coin-sized patches of brightness on their bodies. "Listen well, my child. There are plants that are not in any herbal. They grow in the meadows and forests of the unseen world. This is one of the places where the ordinary world and the unseen world come close together." "Like our house?" asked Lump, breathless. "In a way, although our house is as it is because I am there, and not through any virtue of place. This place is an actual, the word is Pygmalion, a kind of gateway. It has uncovered since the last time I was this way." "I don't understand. Uncovered?" "I will explain. Do you see my apron? In one corner here, there is a lily embroidered, and in the opposite corner, a violet. Now suppose I twist and crumple the apron like this. That is how the ordinary world and the unseen world behave, flowing past each other, touching at places, then separating. See, now the lily and the violet meet, and the two worlds are joined." Lump looked around doubtfully, trying to see marvels in the dappled gloom. This is the unseen world?" he asked. "Yes, but of course you cannot see it. No more could you see a banquet in a chamber barred by a thick oaken door. You would say, 'There's no feasting here.' Nay, the door must be opened for you. Now look into my eyes and do not move." Frightened yet terribly excited, Lump did as he was told. His yellow eyes locked with his mother's grey ones. The hair stood stiff on his scalp and along his spine. She began to sing in a low, hoarse voice, not at all like her everyday voice, a rhythmic song beating the measure on her thigh. The words of the enchantment seemed to emerge slowly from her mouth and burst over him like bubbles. The air grew warm and curiously thick, like goose down rushing through his nostrils, and along with it came a heavy smell, sweet and rancid at the same time. And the motes of dust floating in the air took on colors, red, green, violet, and some he could not identify. "This is like falling asleep," he thought. And then, no, it is like falling awake.
The Picture Book Award goes to So What's It Like to Be a Cat by Carla Cushkin and Betsy Lewin. With the use of catchy rhyme and whimsical illustrations, Carla Cushkin and Betsy Lewin have created a story that is sure to please both cat lovers and those not so keen on cats. The picture book answers all those questions that humans may have about Cat's Mysterious and Sometimes Aloof Behavior. The boy, whose assignment is to conduct an interview, chooses the family pet for a subject. He begins by asking his cat questions to shed light on why cats behave the way they do. The cat is all too happy to explain its proud behavior and mischievous habits. In turn, the cunning cat manages to ask a few questions of its own about human behavior. This is a wonderful story, one that is sure to entertain both young and old. Carla Kushkin is with us tonight, and she's written dozens of poetry collections and picture books. Her works include Roar and More. I wonder if, like the birds, you could roar for us. The Philharmonic Gets Dressed, The Animals in the Ark, Moon, and Have You Met My Mother? She's received numerous awards, including the prestigious Award for Excellence in Poetry for Children from the National Council of Teachers of English and the Children's Book Council's Lifetime Achievement Award.
I also want to let you know a little bit about Betsy Lewin, the illustrator. She's illustrated numerous books for children, including the Caldecott Honor Book, Click, Clack, Moo, Cows That Type, Giggle, Giggle, Quack, Duck for President, and Cat Count, which she also wrote. Betsy couldn't be with us tonight, but she sent this note. I'm so sorry I can't be with you all today, but I am certainly there in spirit. Thank you for this award. I'm truly honored. Carla Kuskin's The Philharmonic Gets Dressed is one of my all-time favorite children's books. So when I was offered her new story to illustrate, I was ecstatic. The fact that the story included a cat made it even more appealing, since cats are my favorite animals. I used my own cat, the late, great Slicky, as a model. The cat being interviewed seemed to suit his personality and wiry, lithe body. I'm glad I could immortalize him. On behalf of Carla and Slicky, I thank you again. Ratish, help. We're going to see the picture book here in just a second. Ratish, can you come down? Never mind. Do you have the book with you?
Thank you. Well, I'm supposed to read this because I wrote it. And it begins, so what's it like to be a cat? Well, I have to, before I read it, I have one thing to say, which is that I've always felt that when you write, the beginning is wonderful, but everything after that, it gets a little more difficult and a little more difficult. And that's true in any poem I've ever written, which can be quite short. It can be true of a story. It wasn't true in this verse. And it wasn't true because Caitlin DeLuey, who is the editor of the book at Athenaeum, had written a poem. She had written a little note to me. Sorry. She'd written a note which said, "What do you think it feels like being a cat?" And I said, "I'm very glad you asked me that." And I was off. The day begins for cats like me as all the world sleeps quietly. I wake up in the friendly dark long, long before the sun is bright. It is the middle of the night. And slipping out on silent feet, I search for something nice. to eat. The hall is dark. Your dish is too. I'd be afraid if I were you. The dark hides lots of scary stuff. Dear questioner, I've heard enough. The hall is dark. That's very true, but I can see as well as you when lights are on. So I will eat till I feel fed, then tiptoe softly back to bed. Do you have a kitty bed with your picture at the head? I do not have a kitty bed to rest my kitty tail and head. I'd rather sleep most anywhere that's warm and soft, a couch, a chair, a sleeping loft. I'll curl up there. And once you're curled, you will not stir but nap compactly wrapped in fur. Meow. And how? When they all get up for breakfast in your early morning house, do you sleep or will you join them for some breakfast bits o' mouse? A cat has her habits, a human has his. As for getting up for breakfast, I don't know what breakfast is. My dog is always glad to see me. He barks good day and shares his bone. But cats are private creatures who are happier when left alone. Of course, I trust and also wish no one forgets to fill my dish. A bit of fish might be delish. I understand you sleep a lot, but once in a while, I leap a lot. Cats have moods like many creatures, mothers, fathers, tigers, teachers, so when I feel the need to prance, I run and whisk my tail and dance. I love these pussycats. They're great. And do you roar? Please tell me more. Now that's the only kid in the book who I really like. But don't say a word. To do you roar, I have this answer. I am a very silent dancer. I whip through doors and slip through alleys. Bounce and pounce and slide and sally, rush and run and twirl and spring at you, my tail, or anything. I whisk my whiskers, pound my paws. But why? Because that is a part of me. Sometimes a feline must fly free. Do you like them? Do they like you? Oh, we know we live with people. Ah, yes, a few. Do you like them? Do they like you? With my cat-like dignity, it never has occurred to me to wonder what they think of me. At times they're dumb, at times they're sweet. They balance nicely on their feet. I do not think that I could do half as well on merely two. But can they nap as fast as you? They cannot do what I can do. They do not nap or leap or lie as gracefully or well as why. They look peculiar with no fur. They do not simply sit and purr. Instead, they stomp around and yell. But nonetheless, I wish them well. They are themselves, and that is that myself. I'd rather be a cat. Yeah.
The Maxine Cushing Gray Fellowship for Writers was created in Ms. Gray's honor by a group of her friends who thought it would be a fitting tribute to her to recognize and support writers. She was a major force in the region's art scene for 40 years. She was a music and dance critic for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, arts editor for the Argus for 20 years, and publisher and editor of Northwest Arts from 1975 until her death in 1987. The criteria for the award state that the recipient must be a writer of poetry or prose, a playwright, journalist, or critic, a writer of serious intent and noteworthy talent, and a resident of the Northwest. The Washington Center for the Book and the Seattle Public Library Foundation have been pleased to participate in this program. Tonight's will be the final award under our administration. The endowment for this award has moved from the Seattle Foundation to the University of Washington Libraries by the endowment's founders. The University of Washington Libraries will administer the award beginning later this fall. And the award has been changed to a Writer in Residence Award. Robert Shinkin, the Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright, will be the 2006-2007 Maxine Cushing Gray Visiting Writer at the UW Libraries. And his public lecture is November 17th at 7 p.m. I was checking with Chris, but we don't know the location, but I'm sure you can look on their website. It's now my great pleasure to present the Maxine Cushing Gray Fellowship for Writers to one of my favorite writers in the world, Ursula K. Le Guin. Ms. Le Guin is a writer of tremendous power and range. She's published more than 60 books of poetry and prose, a libretto, a screenplay, and many chapbooks. She's a renowned poet, short story writer, novelist, and critic. Her many awards include the Hugo Award, the Nebula Award, Pushcart Prize, National Book Award, Penn Malamud Award for Short Fiction, James Tripty Jr. Award, and a Newbery Silver Medal. Her books have been finalists for the American Book Award and the Pulitzer Prize. Ms. Le Guin is particularly recognized for her groundbreaking speculative science fiction novels, which include The Left Hand of Darkness, The Dispossessed, and The Lathe of Heaven. Through her work and advocacy of other writers, she's helped the world awaken to the serious beauty of science fiction writing at its best and the possibilities as world-changing art. Her work has also inspired and guided generations of women writers. And personally, I'm going to tell two stories. This woman has been inspired by Ms. Le Guin. Right after I read The Wizard of Earthsea for the first time when I was in graduate school, I was at a period in my life when I temporarily lost my way and was in a major funk. And there was a moment, and I remember exactly where I was, as you do in those moments, when I realized that everything was going to be all right. And it helped me stay with my religious studies, which are also known as librarianship. So thank you for keeping me in library school and doing that. The second, ironically, but not really that ironically, happened in 1989 after I'd been a librarian for decades. But I was facing my first library election. Ms. Le Guin came to Corvallis, where I was living, and wasn't there to speak for the library, but was there to speak for, I think, Calyx maybe, at an event at our art center. And I remember, and I didn't have a picture, but I can remember it, that it was a big podium, and you could barely see the top of her head, but what you could see was a button that said, "Vote yes for the Corvallis Library." So I'm thrilled to honor and recognize and introduce one of my favorite writers in the world, Ursula K. Le Guin.
Well, thank you all for the honor given through me to literature by such an award. It makes me happy, of course, because writers live on praise, and because it's regional, and I love the Pacific Northwest, and it's a really cool birthday present, too. But I do feel that I'm here as a sort of proxy or stand-in for literature. Literature is too busy to come collect her prize. And she's too big to get into this building, even this building, which was built for her. Literature is huge. They can't even fit her into the Library of Congress because she keeps not talking English. Literature is very big, very polyglot, very old, even older than I am by about 3,000 years, and she weighs a lot. When we come to judge civilizations, we see how heavy literature weighs in the balance. Whole peoples are dismissed as savage or primitive, meaning they didn't write things down, while others are seen as supreme because they left a literature. Now take the ancient Greeks. If it weren't for Homer and Sophocles and Thucydides, all we might know of the Greeks is that they were really good with marble. We wouldn't know that they'd invented tragedy and democracy. We might not even know that democracy had been invented. There have been governments that celebrated literature, but most governments dislike it, justly suspecting that all their power and glory will soon be forgotten unless some wretched, powerless liberal in the basement is writing it down. Now, of course, they do their best to police the basement, but it's hard because government and literature, even when they share a palace, exist on different moral planes. Each is the ghost in the other's bedroom. A government can silence writers easily, but literature always escapes its control. Literature cannot control a government. Poets, as poets, do not legislate. What they can do is set minds free of the control of any tyrant or demagogue and his lies and his disinformation. The Greek Socrates wrote, "The misuse of language induces evil in the soul." Yeah. Evil government relies on deliberate misuse of language. Because literary skill is the rigorous use of language in the pursuit of truth, the habit of literature, of serious reading, is the best defense against believing the half-truths of ideologues and the lies of demagogues. The poet Shelley wrote, "The imagination is the great instrument of moral good." And believing that, I see a public library as the tool shed, the warehouse, the concert hall, the temple, the capital of imagination, of moral good. So here, right here, where we are right now, this is where America stands or falls. Can we still imagine ourselves as free? If not, we've lost our freedom. They said I was serious, see? I am. Thank you for celebrating through this honor to my work the invaluable unruliness of literature and the essential liberty of the imagination. Thanks.
Thank you all for being with us at this program, and please do stay and enjoy the refreshments and buy books. I'm sure authors would like that, although of course you can always check them out at the library, but you can't have them signed. So please join us, and again, thanks for being with us.